Hello and welcome to the LLG Grapevine podcast. You're listening to Helen McGarth, Executive Director for Policy and Governance, and I'm joined today by Dennis Hall, LLG's Bulletin Editor.
Hello, everybody.
Now, last week was a big one for the Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill. More on that later. And we also learned that Boris Johnson will be a new host of TV channel's GB News, following the Advisory Committees on Business Appointments decision that the post would, quote, not raise any particular concerns under the government rules. Of course, former ministers must seek advice from the committee where they take up employment within 2 years of leaving office. This came at a time when the COVID inquiry is examining the former PM's decision-making during the pandemic. Of course, one person who said that people had the right to be concerned about telling the truth whilst welcoming the work of the Privileges Committee. They were the committee who found Mr Johnson had deliberately misled Parliament over lockdown parties in number 10, was Lord Evans. What news there, Dennis?
Well, Helen, yes, Lord Evans is stepping down from the CSPL after 5 years. His verdict? Well, much progress, but there's still unfinished business. Here's more on this. There is still a major problem on the issue of local government standards, the outgoing chair of the Committee on Standards in Public Life has said at the end of his 5-year term. In a valedictory speech at the Institute for Government last week, Lord Evans of Weardale said, "We were very disappointed that the government took 3 years to respond to our 2019 report, Local Government Ethical Standards, and then rejected our recommendations," he said. "We hope that our pragmatic reforms that we recommended, for which there is widespread support in the sector, can be looked at again with fresh eyes." Whilst we welcome, he said, the Local Government Association's Model Code of Conduct, members of the public still have no redress where there are standards failures at a local level. In his speech, Lord Evans considered how the standards landscape has changed, the gaps in the system, and how he thinks public standards need to be strengthened in future. He suggested that the Nolan principles had stood the test of time, but warned that the polarised and unstable nature of British politics in recent years has placed them under great pressure. Lord Evans added, "Our political institutions, as well as our standards bodies and structures, have faced great challenges." Lord Evans suggested, however, that perhaps the most serious problem is around the abuse and intimidation of those in public life. "It is hugely damaging to democracy," he said, "and is a major factor in putting people off serving in public roles." And Lord Evans continued, "We have complex problems to solve as a society. We need to be able to debate and disagree with each other. If intimidation and threats cause talented people to feel that they have to leave public life, and that is happening, or deter good people from considering playing their part by standing as a councillor or a local MP, or applying for a public appointment, then we are all losers." In conclusion, Lord Evans said, "There is no room for complacency. There are still gaps in the system, and I hope," he said, "that government and others will look at those and maintain a dialogue on what we can do to drive high standards."
And we will be discussing Lord Evans' legacy in the blog edition this week, so please do find the time to watch that. Now, the President of the Family Division, Sir Andrew McFarlane, has sought to draw the attention of family judges and practitioners to the provisions of the Civil Procedure Rules governing the disclosure of mobile phone records and other electronic records. Earlier this year, Sir McFarlane invited the Family Procedure Rule Committee to consider making provision in the Family Procedure Rules for the disclosure and examination of mobile phone records and other electronic records. Now, the committee agreed to consider making the necessary amendments to the rule to govern the disclosure of electronic records, but the changes will take time to put them into effect. So pending amendments being made, Sir McFarlane draws the attention of family judges and practitioners to the specific provisions of the CPR, namely 31.17 and PD 31B. In the Court of Appeal case of re-PHL Children Mobile Phone Extraction 2023, Lord Justice King observed as follows. You can read these at paragraph 54 and 56 for those looking to find it within the judgment. Lord Justice King said it's well established that where there's a gap in the Family Procedure Rules 2010, recourse is to be had where appropriate to the CPR 1998, which Justice Molan has pointed out is the common law as now encapsulated in a more detailed code than the Family Procedure Rules for the disclosure and inspection of documents. Rule 21.2 covers orders for disclosure against a person who is not a party. A comparable, although more detailed rule is found at CPR 31.17, also carrying the title Orders for Disclosure Against a Person Not a Party. Now, the FPR 2010 do not specifically deal with the disclosure of electronic materials, referring only to documents. By contrast, the CPR has a practice direction dealing with the issue at 31B. It follows, in my view, that the court may look to CPR 31.17 and Practice Direction 31B for assistance where necessary. The FPR Rule 21.1 subsection 3 defines document as anything in which information of any description is recorded. This definition is developed in relation to electronic material in the CPR Practice Direction 31B, paragraph 1, which extends the broad definition of documents to cover electronic documents. Significant also is that the purpose of the Practice Direction is stated at CPR 31B, paragraph 2, to be to encourage and assist the parties to reach agreement in relation to the disclosure of electronic documents in a proportionate and cost-effective manner. A slightly dry area for the podcast, but an important one, and one I hope will assist. Now, Dennis, it was rather an eventful week last week for the highs and lows of remote meeting provision, but that's only a small part of what was the Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill.
Indeed it was, Helen. But in my next item, I reflect on the passing of the Levelling Up Bill recently through the Lords and the intransigence of the government on that remote meeting issue. Earlier last week, the Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill was back in the Commons for MPs to consider the Lords' amendments to the bill. The government tabled a motion to remove various Lords' amendments. This included 2 successful motions which removed amendments that the LGA supported, which would have given councils the ability to set planning fees locally and the flexibility to use virtual meeting technology in meetings. On planning fees, the government said that they agree that it is vital for local planning authorities to have the resources they need to deliver an effective planning service. However, they do not believe that enabling authorities to vary fees and charges is the way to answer resourcing issues, as this will lead to inconsistency of fees between local planning authorities and does not provide an incentive to tackle inefficiencies. The LGA have worked with peers to secure an amendment in lieu tabled by LGA Vice President Baroness Pinnock, which would allow councils to set planning fees locally in cases where national fees do not meet the costs of processing an application, but the provision is subject to ministerial approval. On virtual meetings, the LGA are also supporting an amendment in lieu tabled by Baroness Pickering, which would allow a minister to bring forward secondary legislation to specify circumstances in which councils may be permitted to hold meetings that utilise virtual meeting technology. The debate reflected the total intransigence of government on the remote meeting question and demonstrates how out of touch it is on this important question for our sector. But there has been some light, however. On Monday, the 23rd of October, the government was defeated in the House of Lords over a remote meetings amendment to the Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill. Baroness McIntosh of Pickering put forward an amendment which means that a minister would be able to bring forward secondary legislation to specify circumstances in which councils may be permitted to hold meetings that utilise virtual meeting technology. This was carried, but these amendments are due to go back to the Commons for further consideration. In response for the government, Earl Howe, Conservative, said the government stands by its original opposition to this amendment. The government has consistently expressed the view that councillors should be physically present to cast their votes and interact in person with citizens. It is important, he said, that they are present, active participants in local democracy, and our position on the matter has not changed. The heart of this issue, according to him, is the strength of the scrutiny exercised by local authorities and the integrity of democratic principles. And since compiling this piece, government in the Commons has since rejected the latest Lord's motion on remote meetings.
Yes, they did. On Monday, I was full of hope following a successful vote in the House of Lords, and by Wednesday, it was all over. Baroness McIntosh of Pickering, who I must thank here for all she has done, said in the Lords she was a little baffled and bewildered by the government's unwillingness to move a little, and further that there was a slight irony that the government are devolving powers in the bill to local authorities, but not the power to decide to permit certain councillors to attend remotely when they have difficulty. I agree, although I'm not just a little baffled, I'm tremendously so. The Earl of Lytton, a past president of the National Association of Local Councils, whom incidentally he referred to as the parent of parish and town councils in this country, which I rather liked, stated that he was sorry that the government had not seen fit to acquiesce to any of this. The minister suggested that the measure went too far and that it would open up the floodgates. Where that is fear, it seems to me that it would have been perfectly possible to come back with a proviso that the Secretary of State would make regulations. Earl Lytton went on, one matter that has never been explained to my satisfaction is the juxtaposition, the fact that, by definition, accountability is somehow measured by physical presence. I do not get that, and I do not think that there will be many members of the House present today who will get it. This issue will come back through sheer force of practicality and necessity. We have to move into the modern age. Quite so, Earl Lytton. Now, in my view, the government's hard line of democratic principles raises a question. How? Does this not play out in Wales then? Is Wales substandard in its approach to democratic values because they have remote meeting provision? Certainly not. What is driving the government's stance? Because it clearly isn't the court of public opinion. We have to resign ourselves to the fact that there is absolutely nothing more to be done at this point. We will continue to monitor the landscape and look to sweep remote meeting provision up within a more bolder and larger campaign to modernise local government legislation and engender a fit-for-purpose regime reflective of the fact that we are almost a quarter of the way through the 21st century. Dennis, move us on from my obsession, please.
Well, I'll try. Finance and legal issues are interlinked. Let's be clear about that. And our members need to know what's happening on the financial front. Financial crises are testing and stressing the systems of governance in all councils. So this is what the LGA have said recently about the forthcoming autumn statement. Councils in England face a funding gap of £4 billion over the next 2 years, the Local Government Association has claimed. This is a £1 billion increase since the LGA's initial analysis in July, as cost and demand pressures continue to rise. And the research, published ahead of the autumn statement next month, also indicates that by 2024 to 2025, cost and demand pressures will have added £15 billion, almost 29%, to the cost of delivering council services since 2021 to 22. The LGA said councils are facing an inflationary storm, which is adding unsustainable costs onto council budgets. Some councils have warned that these costs are threatening their financial sustainability, not least because councils have already absorbed a 27% real terms cut in core spending power since 2010. In a submission to the Chancellor of the Exchequer, the LGA said that the government needs to provide immediate funding so councils can deliver the 2023-24 budgets they set this year and meet ongoing cost and demand pressures. And it added that the government also needs to ensure that councils have sufficient resources to set balanced budgets next year without having to make drastic cuts to services. Additional resources cannot come solely from hard-pressed council taxpayers, the LGA argued. Now, the association suggested that neither council tax increases nor the use of financial reserves were solutions to long-term financial pressures, and the government should work with councils on a long-term plan for greater funding certainty through timely multi-year settlements and more clarity on financial reform, the LGA added. And the LGA estimated in July that councils were facing funding gaps of £2 billion in 2023 to 24 and £900 million in 2024-25. Following an updated inflation forecast from the Bank of England in August, their analysis now shows funding gaps of £2.4 billion in 2023-24 and £1.6 billion in 2024-25. And these gaps relate solely to the funding needed to maintain services at their current levels, the LGA said.
Well, the independent writes that district councils in England have warned that they could be forced to reduce local services, such as waste collection and park maintenance, in the next 2 years to cope with dwindling funds. The District Council's network has projected funding shortfalls of over £500 million in both of the next 2 financial years. Now, taken from the LGA Bulletin, the Care Quality Commission's annual report warns that cost of living pressures and NHS backlogs are creating a 2-tier health service in England, where people who cannot afford to pay wait longer for care. The CQC say local authority budgets have been unable to keep pace with rising costs and the increase in the number of people needing care. Councillor David Fothergill, who's the chairman of the LGA's Community Wellbeing Board, said, as this important report highlights yet again, social care needs a dedicated workforce plan to address the recruitment and retention crisis, especially as we approach winter, including action on staff pay, conditions, skills, training and development. Immediate investment is needed in the autumn statement to end the gridlock, address unmet and undermet need, and ensure timely access to social care for all who need it, not just those who are able to afford it. Elsewhere, the BBC reports that children in Surrey and Sussex are being housed in illegal homes amid severe shortage of approved placements. 49 children aged under 16 were placed between March 22 to 23 in housing not approved by Ofsted. This has previously been the subject of scrutiny by various committees and are not isolated cases. Obviously, they were last resort cases and they were reported to Ofsted, but it definitely highlights significant lack of provision. Earlier this year, the government were warned about a shortage of places by Mark Kerr from the Children's Homes Association, stating, "We have a crisis now that's going to deteriorate." The report states that 80% of regulated children's homes in England are provided for by private companies, which are suffering from chronic staff shortages and a severe squeeze on places. The government, meanwhile, states it's investing £142 million over 3 years to make the transition to Ofsted registration successful. And on that very sobering note, you can read more on the items discussed today and many more besides by going to bulletin number 37, available on the LLG website now. So until then, it's goodbye from me.
And from me too. Bye now.